The forest echoed with a sharp, desperate cry, cutting through the crisp morning air like a blade. Ethan's breath quickened as he stepped cautiously through the dense undergrowth, his flashlight beam trembling with each movement. The sound was relentless, haunting, like nothing he'd ever heard before. It wasn't the cry of a bird or the howl of a wolf. It was something smaller, something in pain. His heart raced as questions flooded his mind. What was it? Was it dangerous? And why couldn't he turn away? Pushing aside the branches, he froze in place. Just a few feet ahead, tangled in a cruel, rusted trap, was a bear cub. Its tiny body trembled, and its wide, tearful eyes locked onto him as it let out another heart-wrenching cry. Blood stained the forest floor beneath its injured paw, and Ethan felt an immediate wave of panic and sorrow. The cub was helpless, but the situation was far from simple. Every instinct told him to move slowly, because where there's a cub, a mother bear isn't far behind. In the wild, life and death often hang by a thread. For one small bear cub, its fragile cry for help would bring it face to face with an unlikely savior. And for Ethan, this moment would become a test of courage, compassion, and survival. The cub's struggles grew weaker as Ethan crouched low, his mind racing. He had no tools, no plan, only the knowledge that time was running out. Every sound in the forest made him flinch, his eyes darting nervously for any sign of movement. What if the mother bear returned? What if his attempt to help only made things worse? But as the cub let out another soft whimper, Ethan knew he couldn't walk away. Just hours earlier, Ethan had been starting his day on the farm, a morning like any other. He had no idea that a faint, distant cry from the forest would lead him to this moment. Now, standing face to face with a terrified, injured creature, he realized that the choices he made next would change everything. What began as a quiet morning on the farm had turned into a life-or-death decision in the heart of the wild. This was no longer just about saving a bear cub. It was about finding the strength to face the unknown. As Ethan ventures deeper into the forest, the cries become louder, pulling him toward a dense thicket. The air is heavy with tension, the forest unusually still, as if holding its breath. Suddenly, he spots a small figure struggling in the shadows. It's a bear cub, no older than a few months, caught in an old, rusted animal trap. The cub's paw is clamped tightly, and its tiny body trembles with fear and pain. Ethan approaches cautiously, mindful of the cub's distress and the potential danger of a protective mother nearby. The cub's tearful eyes meet his, filled with desperation, as if pleading for help. At that moment, Ethan realizes he's the cub's only hope, but freeing it will be far more challenging than he expected. Standing just a few feet away from the trapped cub, Ethan is torn between fear and compassion. The cub's soft cries pierce the silence, pulling at his heartstrings, but his mind races with doubts. What if the mother bear is nearby, watching and ready to attack at any moment? What if his attempt to free the cub puts both of them in greater danger? Ethan surveys the trap. It's old but firmly locked, requiring tools he doesn't have. He glances back toward the trail, wondering if he should leave and return with help, but the thought of abandoning the cub, even temporarily, feels unbearable. As the cub lets out another pitiful whimper, Ethan feels an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Time is running out, and he knows he must make a decision quickly. Risk his safety to save the cub, or turn away and live with the guilt of leaving it behind. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he inched closer to the trapped bear cub. Every instinct screamed at him to stay back, but the cub's frightened eyes and soft whimpers anchored him in place. The small creature was caught in an old steel trap, its tiny leg bleeding and trembling with pain. Ethan scanned the area, his eyes darting to the dense forest around him, knowing full well that the mother bear could be nearby. He gripped the small knife he carried, not as a weapon, but as a makeshift tool, and steeled himself for what he was about to do. The trap was ancient but cruelly efficient, its rusted metal teeth gripping the cub's leg tightly. Ethan crouched low, careful not to make any sudden movements that might scare the cub further. "It's okay, little one," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. The cub flinched but didn't try to fight him off. It seemed to sense that he was there to help. Ethan examined the trap. It was jammed shut, and the rust made it even harder to loosen. He tried prying it open with his knife, but the blade was too small to gain proper leverage. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he worked, his hands shaking from both fear and adrenaline. He could hear every crackle of a twig, every rustle in the bushes, and with each sound, he braced himself for the possibility of the mother bear charging at him. The cub let out a sharp cry, and Ethan froze. His heart skipped a beat as he scanned the surrounding forest again. Still no sign of the mother. "Hang in there," he murmured, returning his focus to the trap. He used a sturdy branch he found nearby as a lever, wedging it between the metal teeth. With all his strength, he pressed down on the branch. The trap groaned but refused to budge. Ethan's mind raced. He knew time was running out, not just because of the potential arrival of the mother bear, but because the cub's leg was losing circulation. If he didn't act fast, the injury might become permanent, or worse, life-threatening. Summoning all his strength, he pressed down on the branch once more. This time, the trap gave way slightly. The cub whimpered again, but Ethan pressed on, his muscles burning with effort. Finally, with a loud creak, the trap sprang open, and the cub yanked its leg free. Ethan stumbled back, gasping for breath. The cub limped a few steps away, then turned to look at him. Relief washed over Ethan, but his job wasn't done yet. The cub's leg was bleeding, and without proper care, it wouldn't survive. He ripped a strip of cloth from his shirt and carefully approached the cub again. "Just a little longer, buddy," he said softly. The cub didn't resist as Ethan wrapped its injured leg, tying the cloth tightly to stop the bleeding. Exhausted but determined, Ethan picked up the cub gently. His next challenge, finding a safe place to get the cub the help it desperately needed. Carrying the injured bear cub through the dense forest, Ethan felt an unexpected wave of emotion wash over him. The cub, initially squirming and frightened, had grown still in his arms, its tiny body warm against his chest. Its soft fur was damp and matted, and every so often it let out a small, pitiful sound, a mix of pain and fear. Ethan spoke to it in a calming voice, unsure if the cub understood his words, but hoping his tone conveyed safety. "We're going to get you some help," he said gently. "You'll be okay, little one." As the hours passed, something remarkable began to happen. The cub, which had been so tense and defensive, started to relax. Its eyes, once wide with terror, softened as it nestled closer to Ethan. Despite its injury, it seemed to sense that Ethan wasn't a threat. Instead, the cub appeared to trust him, an extraordinary moment of connection between a wild animal and a human. Ethan couldn't help but smile as the cub nuzzled its head into his chest, seeking comfort. Ethan stopped by a small clearing to rest. He gently set the cub down on a patch of moss, careful not to disturb its injured leg. As he sat beside it, the cub didn't try to run or hide. Instead, it stayed close to him, its eyes following his every movement. Ethan reached for his canteen and took a sip of water before pouring a small amount into his hand. The cub hesitated, but eventually leaned forward, lapping up the water with its tiny pink tongue. "There you go," Ethan said with a chuckle. "We're figuring this out together." The bond between them grew stronger with each passing moment. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the cub's resilience. Despite its pain and the frightening ordeal it had endured, it still showed a spark of curiosity. At one point, the cub lifted its uninjured paw and tapped at Ethan's hand, almost as if asking for more water. Ethan obliged, feeling a sense of pride at earning the trust of such a vulnerable creature. As night fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal animals. Ethan built a small fire to keep them warm, positioning himself between the cub and the open woods to offer some sense of protection. The cub curled up beside him, its tiny body pressing against his leg. Ethan gently stroked its fur, marveling at how natural this interaction felt despite the circumstances. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd be out here sharing a fire with a bear cub. Life's funny that way." The cub let out a soft, almost contented sigh, and Ethan smiled. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about saving an animal's life. It was about a connection that transcended fear, species, and circumstances. The bond they shared was a testament to the power of trust and compassion, a reminder that even in the wildest of places, kindness could bridge the gap between two very different worlds. As dawn broke over the forest, Ethan woke to find the cub still curled up beside him, its small body rising and falling with each breath. The fire had long since died out, leaving behind faint wisps of smoke and glowing embers. Ethan stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long night on the forest floor. He glanced down at the cub, which opened its eyes and looked up at him with a mixture of curiosity and trust. The cub's injured leg had stopped bleeding, but it still looked painful. Ethan knew the next step would be critical. As much as he had grown attached to the little creature, he understood that its best chance of survival lay in being reunited with its mother. But where to begin? The forest was vast, and he had no idea how far the cub had wandered from its family. The only clue he had was the direction the cub had been facing when he first found it, and even that wasn't much to go on. Ethan decided to follow his instincts. Gathering his belongings, he carefully lifted the cub into his arms, mindful of its injury, and began walking deeper into the forest. The cub seemed calmer now, almost as if it sensed that Ethan's intentions were pure. Every so often, it would let out a small, high-pitched cry, a sound Ethan hoped its mother would recognize if she were nearby. The hours stretched on as Ethan navigated the dense underbrush and towering trees. The forest was alive with the sounds of wildlife, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the occasional snap of a twig. Each sound made Ethan's heart race, wondering if it could be the cub's mother. He called out periodically, his voice echoing through the trees. "I'm bringing your baby back. Are you out there?" His words felt futile, but he couldn't give up. As he continued, Ethan began to notice subtle signs that he might be on the right track. Fresh claw marks on a tree trunk, a tuft of fur caught on a branch, and overturned patches of dirt all suggested the presence of a larger bear. He felt a glimmer of hope, but also a twinge of fear. A mother bear would be fiercely protective of her cub, and Ethan knew he had to approach the situation carefully. Eventually, Ethan came across a clearing where the undergrowth was trampled, as if a large animal had recently passed through. He set the cub down gently and took a few steps back, giving it space. The cub, down gently and took a few steps back, giving it space. The cub, still weak, let out another cry, this time louder, more desperate. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then a low, rumbling growl emerged from the shadows. Ethan froze as a massive figure stepped into the clearing. It was the mother bear, her dark eyes scanning the scene. She sniffed the air, her gaze locking onto the cub. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Ethan stayed perfectly still, his hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. The mother bear moved cautiously toward the cub, her growls softening into grunts. The cub responded with a high-pitched whimper, dragging itself toward her on its injured leg. Ethan felt his chest tighten as he watched the reunion unfold. The mother bear nudged the cub gently with her nose, inspecting its injury before turning her gaze toward Ethan. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, their eyes met. Ethan felt no malice in her stare, only a deep, primal gratitude. Without another sound, the mother bear lifted the cub gently by the scruff of its neck and disappeared into the forest, leaving Ethan standing in awe of the bond he had just witnessed. Ethan exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. The search was over, and while he felt a pang of sadness watching the cub leave, he knew he had done the right thing. The forest felt different now, quieter, yet more alive. As he turned to make his way back home, Ethan couldn't help but feel a profound sense of connection to the wild and its incredible resilience. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Ethan stood frozen in the clearing, the small cub resting at his feet. The cub let out another cry, louder and more desperate this time, its sound carrying through the stillness like a lifeline. Ethan's heart raced. He wasn't sure what to expect, a rush of relief if the cub's cries reached its mother, or perhaps an overwhelming sense of fear if the mother bear arrived and mistook him for a threat. A low, rumbling growl cut through the quiet, sending shivers down Ethan's spine. He instinctively stepped back, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. From the shadows of the dense undergrowth, a massive figure emerged. The mother bear was here. She was magnificent, towering, powerful, yet emanating a sense of grace. Her dark eyes scanned the clearing, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. Her gaze locked onto the cub, and Ethan saw a flicker of recognition in her expression. For a moment, the wild instincts of survival were replaced by something unmistakably tender. The deep, primal bond between a mother and her young. The cub, still weak from its ordeal, lifted its head and let out another plaintive whimper. Its tiny body quivered as it tried to stand, dragging itself forward on its injured leg. Ethan's heart clenched as he watched the cub struggle, determined to reach its mother despite the pain. The mother bear growled softly, the sound carrying none of the menace Ethan had feared. Instead, it was almost a reassurance, as if she was telling the cub, "I'm here now." She stepped cautiously into the clearing, her massive paws making almost no sound on the forest floor. Ethan stayed as still as possible, his body tense but his mind resolute. This was what he had hoped for, a reunion that would give the cub its best chance at survival. As the mother bear approached, Ethan noticed how she moved with a mix of urgency and caution. Her powerful body was poised to protect, yet her every step toward the cub was gentle, deliberate. When she was close enough, she lowered her massive head, sniffing at the cub with what seemed like infinite care. The cub responded with a high-pitched squeal, nudging its tiny nose against hers. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had never witnessed anything like this before. The raw emotion of the moment. Love, relief, and a shared understanding of the fragility of life was palpable. The mother bear nudged the cub again, this time more forcefully, as if to encourage it to stand. The cub tried, its small legs wobbling beneath it. It took one shaky step, then another, before collapsing against its mother's side. The mother bear turned her gaze to Ethan. For a moment, he felt the full weight of her attention, her dark eyes assessing him. It wasn't the look of a predator sizing up its prey. It was something far deeper. Gratitude. A silent acknowledgement that he had done something extraordinary by helping her cub. Ethan lowered his hands slightly, his voice soft and steady as he spoke. "She's all yours now," he murmured. "Take good care of her." The mother bear seemed to understand. She let out a low huff, almost a sigh, before turning her attention back to the cub. With surprising tenderness, she lifted the cub by the scruff of its neck, her strong jaws cradling it as if it weighed nothing. The cub didn't resist. It simply hung there, trusting that it was safe now. Ethan watched as the mother bear began to retreat into the forest, her cub dangling gently from her mouth. She moved with purpose, her large form disappearing into the shadows of the trees. The cub let out one last soft cry, a sound that seemed to say goodbye. As the forest swallowed them up, Ethan exhaled deeply, realizing he had been holding his breath. The tension in his body melted away, replaced by a profound sense of relief and awe. He had done it. The cub was back where it belonged, and the mother bear had accepted his actions without hostility. Ethan stood in the clearing for a while longer, the silence around him now feeling serene rather than oppressive. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the risks he had taken, the bond he had formed with the cub, and the lessons he had learned about resilience and compassion. The forest, with all its wild unpredictability, had shown him something truly extraordinary. As he turned to make his way back, Ethan felt a mix of emotions: joy for the reunion he had witnessed, sadness for the parting, and a deep respect for the natural world. The bond between the mother bear and her cub had been a reminder of the strength of love and the lengths to which it could drive someone, or something, to protect what they held dear. Ethan knew he would never forget this experience. The image of the cub, safe in its mother's care, would stay with him forever. It was a story he would carry in his heart, a testament to the power of compassion and the incredible connections that could form between humans and the wild. Ethan stood at the edge of the clearing, watching as the mother bear and her cub disappeared into the dense forest. The soft rustling of leaves and the faint snap of twigs were the only sounds as they moved farther away, until the forest seemed to swallow them whole. The cub's final, faint cry echoed in Ethan's ears, a sound that carried both relief and a quiet goodbye. He let out a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. The danger had passed and the mission was complete, yet his heart felt heavier than he had expected. There was a bitter sweetness in the air, knowing that the bond he had shared with the cub, however brief, had come to an end. Still, there was peace in knowing that the cub was now safe, back where it belonged, with its mother in the wild. Letting go wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. Ethan had played his part, and now the forest would take over, as it always had. As Ethan turned to make his way back through the woods, the morning light filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow over the path ahead. His mind replayed the events of the day. The cub's cries, the rusted trap, the moment of trust between them, and the powerful reunion with the mother bear. Each step he took was filled with reflection. Ethan couldn't help but feel a profound sense of connection to the natural world, a world that was both fierce and fragile. The forest had tested him, forced him to step outside of his comfort zone, and reminded him of the delicate balance between survival and compassion. In saving the cub, Ethan didn't just rescue a life. He rediscovered the meaning of kindness and the bond that ties all living beings together. By the time he reached the edge of the woods, the farm field stretching out before him, Ethan felt different. He had left the forest, but a part of it stayed with him, a newfound respect for the wild and its extraordinary resilience. With a faint smile, he glanced back toward the towering trees one last time, silently wishing the cub and its mother a safe journey. Sometimes, the greatest acts of courage aren't grand gestures. They're quiet decisions to do what's right, even when no one is watching. And sometimes, the wild reminds us that every life, no matter how small, is worth fighting for. Ethan walked back toward his farmhouse, the forest fading into the distance behind him. The air felt lighter now, and his steps carried a quiet confidence. He had done his part, and the story of the cub and its mother would stay with him forever, a testament to the power of compassion in even the harshest of places. As Ethan approached his farmhouse, the sun was setting over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The day had been unlike any other he'd experienced, a day that tested his courage, compassion, and respect for the natural world. He paused at the edge of his property, glancing back toward the forest that now held a special place in his heart. The image of the mother bear and her cub reunited replayed in his mind, a moment so powerful it brought a faint smile to his lips. Ethan reflected on the fragile balance of nature and the delicate bond between humans and wildlife. The cub's cries, its helpless state in the trap, and its unwavering trust in him were reminders of how intertwined their worlds were. He had been given the opportunity to make a difference, and he had chosen to act, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. The wild is often seen as a place of survival, where only the strongest endure. But sometimes the wild shows us something unexpected, a chance for connection, compassion, and understanding. Ethan's journey wasn't just about saving the cub. It was about rediscovering his own humanity. He realized that kindness wasn't limited by species or circumstances. It was a universal language, one that bridged the gap between a frightened cub and a farmer who couldn't bear to walk away. As the farmhouse came into view, Ethan thought about the lessons the day had taught him. He had witnessed both the cruelty and beauty of nature, the sharp teeth of a trap and the gentle nudge of a mother bear reuniting with her cub. These moments, though fleeting, left a lasting impact. Ethan resolved to do more. He couldn't erase the existence of traps or prevent every harm that befell the animals in the forest, but he could take small steps to make a difference. He decided to educate his neighbors about the importance of coexisting with wildlife and to advocate for removing traps that posed unnecessary harm. This isn't just a story about a bear cub, it's a story about choices, the choice to act, to care, and to make a difference. Every small act of kindness creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Ethan wanted others to understand the significance of even the smallest lives. The cub may have been just one creature in a vast forest, but to its mother, it was everything. And to Ethan, it was a reminder that humanity's role wasn't to dominate nature, but to protect and preserve it. Standing on his porch, Ethan gazed back at the forest one last time. He knew he might never see the cub or its mother again, but that was okay. Their story had already changed him in ways he couldn't fully describe. Sometimes it takes a helpless cry in the wild to remind us of the strength within ourselves. And sometimes the most profound lessons come from the quiet moments when we choose compassion over indifference. Ethan stepped inside, carrying with him a renewed sense of purpose. The cub's story had ended in the forest, but for Ethan, it was just the beginning of a life lived with greater care for the world around him.